Welcome to a series that we call The End of Times, where we're going through the book of Revelation verse by verse to try our best to see what it is we can expect to happen in the end times, or the times Jesus refers to as the end of the age. Now, as we've gone through the book of Revelation verse by verse, I want to take some time at the beginning of this video to just give you a disclaimer that, this is episode 83 or 84, and we've gone through the book verse by verse, and oftentimes when we get to passages like the ones we're going to go over today, people that just have heard of these passages, they're very familiar. Everybody's heard of the number of the beast, and suddenly people become experts. And it's very important to understand that God laid out the book of Revelation the way it is perfect. And oftentimes people who haven't studied the book of Revelation, they'll jump to things and they'll say, well, this is this and this is that in the world, and that's what this is in the world. And just want to warn you to be cautious of that. On this show, we only use the Bible as a reference. So literally every single thing that we talk about as we've gone through the book of Revelation, we have then gone through other verses in the Bible to support what it is this is saying, because when God laid the entire Word of God out, it's perfect. Everything that God had to say to all of mankind is in here, and it's perfect. And if you're just jumping to verses and saying you're an expert on it, you're really kind of distorting what it is the Word of God is actually trying to say. So, with that being said, where we are in the book of Revelation is we talked about the two different beasts. There's the beast of the sea. It's a 10-horned beast made up of 10 kings. And then we have the beast of the land, which is a 2-horned beast. It's a beast made up of 2 men who then cause the world to worship the Antichrist and force everybody to take a mark in order to buy or sell goods. And now we get to the verse we are, which is chapter 13. And we're just going to go back to 16, but we're picking it up in 18 is where we left off. So we'll go back to 16. And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark of the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. Now I want to kind of go back and remind you just a little bit as we talked about what this mark is on the last episode. The mark is something that you knowingly take. God, in taking it, condemns you to hell, as well as what we're going to get through here in chapter 16 is the bowls of judgment. Those are poured out on those who take the mark. God is not going to condemn people to hell on accident. It's a purposeful decision you take to worship the Antichrist over Jesus, because what takes place in the forcefulness of this mark is the warring of the saints. There's a war taking place between those who stand up for Jesus Christ and the majority of the world who stands up for the Antichrist. And this war is a very brutal war that goes on for 3.5 years. So taking this mark is a clear decision. It's not an accident, like you got the wrong credit card or something like that. It's a clear decision you will make. Now, with that being said, let's talk about the number of the beast. Now, in order to really understand this, I kind of broke it down into what the original text, the Greek words here say. So I just kind of want to go through that real quick, because there's a lot of people can conjure up the number 666 in many different ways, but that doesn't necessarily mean it applies to the beast, because what this is it's here is wisdom. It's an identifying factor. It's a way to identify the Antichrist. So here is wisdom. Now, word is Sophia, skill. It's derived from human or divine insight of wisdom. So it's having skill, some sort of divine insight or human insight of knowledge to understand a thing. Let him who has understanding, and that word understanding is the word vav, which is intellect of the mind. It's kind of having a knowledge set. It's you have the wisdom and you have the intellect to kind of see, to put some things together to help you understand what this number means. So let him who has understanding calculate. Now I want to talk about that word calculate for a second. It's a word fesifado, which is to calculate. Also use pebbles to come to an enumeration. It was a method that Greeks would use for oftentimes voting or deciding on something. They would use this word and this terminology, but it is to calculate. It's to enumerate something. Calculate the number. Now that number is arithmon. It's a number. It means a number. Now I also want to say that that's the accusative version of that word, and we're going to come back to that because it uses the number twice here. So it's the word arithmon. So let him who has understanding calculate the arithmon, the number of the beast. For it is the number, and this time it's the word of the rhythmos, which is a nominative. And that I'm not getting into an English lesson here, but accusative versus nominative. Nominative is the subject of the next thing. So it's the number of a man. And that word man is anthropa, or a human being. So, and I bring up that numerative versus accusative because they say the word number twice in a sentence. And they use two different words for it. The second time they use the number, meaning it is attached to a human being. Now, let's use the word human being there for a second and just eliminate that this is a number of a government, or it's a number of a position, or it's a number of a group of people, or it's the number of a church. It's the number attached to a human being is literally the interpretation of the Greek words there. So it's very important that this is a human being with a number attached to him, or possibly two human beings, and we'll get to that here in a second. So it's the number of the beast, for it is the number attached to a human being. And his number is 666. Now, I'm going to talk about that number for a bit. We're going to spend a good time talking about this number. The word that we're often going to see interpreted here for that number is hexakasoi, which is 660, and it's often interpreted 666. However, one of the original scrolls, a papyrus from one of the original writings of Revelation, actually gave the Greek word number 616, 616. So I just kind of want to throw that out there real quick. Which number is it? I couldn't tell you, because, I always say, and my general reference is, if you don't know, go back to the original text. Well, if the original text says 616, there's some interpretation issues going on here. Now, with that being said, this video isn't to say, well, it's 616, it's not 666. What I'm saying is, if you see somebody who looks like the Antichrist, who acts like the Antichrist, but when you calculate their number, it equals 616. Don't write that off. That could be the actual number. However, most interpretations are going to give you the 666 number, but it's 666, not six singular sixes. The number is 666. So it's very important that we see it as a three-digit number, not just three singular digits. So one thing I want to say before we get into how to calculate this number is that I find the number 666 very interesting because it's the limitations of man. God created humans on the sixth day. He told people to work for 6 days and then rest on the seventh. 7 is the number of perfection of omnipotent God. It's the number of perfection. And man cannot reach that number. So I find this number very fascinating because it's exactly the limitations of man. Every single digit in it talks about the maximum limitations of man, which is what the Antichrist is he's the maximum limitations of man, which is nothing compared to God. And that's all he is. He's a limited man who happens to be possessed by Satan and given great authority by Satan, but he's still just a man, and we have to that's why I love this number. All right, so what is the number of a human being? Well, most likely we're talking about Gematria. Now, what Gematria is Jewish math. Now, all prophecy relates to Israel somehow. So it would make sense that we would be, when it says to calculate the number of a man, that we would use Jewish name math to do so. And what it is essentially they give a value to each letter in a name, and depending on the order, then there's a calculation that's thrown in, and you get a total of what the value of that name is worth. So there's a lot of Gematria calculators online. You can get online, you can throw in your own name and see what its value is. If you have some guesses on who you think the Antichrist is, you can throw in their names and see what that looks like. I also would encourage you to look at literal family names, because a lot of people's names have changed over the years from their original family heritage names. But look at it. It's fascinating. I don't begin to be a Gematria expert at all, but I can run a Gematria calculator. That I can do. So I do have my suspicions on who this person is. Again, I'm going to hold all that till we get to the section on Babylon. Then I'm going to kind of lay down who I think the Antichrist is and who these other players are. But I will also say that there's a chance that it's actually two people's names, because I want to talk about this beast that's making you do this. Is a two-maned beast. It's got two horns. It's made up of two men. So there's the probability that this number is actually attached to two men and not just one man. Again, I'm just going to stick a question mark on that. However, I do have my suspicions. So, there we are. It's, chances are this number is linked to one man, but it could be linked to two men. Gematria is going to be most likely your calculation, because it's, a lot of times we can say, oh, well, this guy lives at this address, and then he's got a building this tall, and then he's this president. He's, if you put all those numbers together, it equals 666. I don't believe that is what it is, because it specifically says, here is wisdom, which is skill or insight. It's having an ability to run numbers through a calculation. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding, the intellect of the mind, to calculate the number, to literally enumerate a number that isn't necessarily attached to anything of the beast. For it is the number, now it's attached to something of a human being. His number is 666. So that's what I believe that number is. It's a promise from God that if you have wisdom and you have insight, that He will show you what this means. Now, I also want to take this time, because as we talk about wisdom and understanding, I think it's important that we always take the time to pray for wisdom and understanding from God, because it's a prayer that He answers, and He promises you, if you ask for wisdom, He's going to give you wisdom. It may not be the wisdom you want, and it may not lead to the answers you want, but if you ask for it, He will give it to you. So I just want to kind of take this moment and just ask everybody to pray for wisdom, as we're kind of in this section where it says, hey, by the way, if you have wisdom and you have the ability for understanding, then you can actually calculate this number. I think it's important that we take the time to pray for that understanding and His wisdom as we continue through the book of Revelation. Having understanding and having wisdom is a prayer that God says yes to. So just want to throw that out. Take this time to pray for it. But ultimately what you're looking at a number. It's a calculation, most likely Gematria, that is attached to a human being or two human beings. That's kind of what I get from these verses here. I didn't find any cross references in the Bible of numbers attached to men, other than the limiting factor of man being 6, the number of God of perfection being 7. This limiting factor is no wonder it is 666. It's the maximum limitations of a human. It's fascinating. Love to hear your thoughts on all that. Put it in the comments below. If you like this video, click like and subscribe. If you feel called to support this channel through Patreon, that link is also below. But the most important part of this channel is we take prayer requests, so never hesitate to send that in. Thank you for watching this episode of God, Family, and Guns. And as always, love God, love your family, and love guns.